to also join in. Hopefully he can make it soon. A warm welcome to our webinar. Today on safeguarding people and elections, we will really be looking at how can we mitigate online threats within the African region during elections. In terms of housekeeping, just to mention that this call will be live streamed onto our YouTube page. So please, if you have any reservations to that, feel free to use a pseudonym or to keep your video off. Also, we will be recording the call. Again, if you have any reservations being captured, please do likewise, use a pseudonym or keep your video off. Other than that, today's agenda will flow as was shared. I would start with a brief overview of a white paper that we are launching this afternoon that is focused on tech harms within the African region during elections. It will really be just to give a background and set some context into today's discussion. And then thereafter, we'll cross over to Kimau Harvey from the Legal Resources Center, who's going to give us some context from South Africa. And hopefully by then, Richard Castle from Community Focus Ghana would have joined. That will also chip in for us to learn what is currently happening within the Ghanaian context. And of course, Armando, who's also going to shed light on the Mozambican election. So we have quite a filled lineup of speakers and activities this afternoon. So in the interest of time, I believe we can just go ahead and start, just so we can also finish on time. That said, as you may know, today's webinar really, us being in election season and the eve of the South African election, which takes place tomorrow. So today's webinar really just seeks to explore the landmark outcomes that have been documented on the African continent and some of the implications that they have had on democracy. We'll also explore some of the potential and actual outcomes leading up to the South African election, the Ghanaian election, and the Mozambican election, for us just to explore what sort of tech harms are currently happening, or what do our speakers project will be happening right up to the election date. Other than that, we hope also to discuss some of the lessons learned from tech platform failures to roll out and implement effective guardrails. That said, allow me to present my screen so I can go over the white paper on terms during elections in Africa. I believe you can see my screen, right?
Yes, Belinda, I can see your screen. Thank you.
Thanks for confirming. Okay. So Digital Action drafted this white paper on tech harms during elections in Africa. This was really meant to be a paper that explores all the different tech harms that have happened previously prior to the launch of our campaign under the Global Coalition for Tech Justice that launched late of last year. So it's really to explore and document a lot of those tech harms that had happened within the electoral context in the different African countries, just so we have a bit of a basis and a background to what has happened, and that would help us to monitor what is currently holding on ground in that aspect. To briefly speak about the methodology that we use and really just to highlight some of the objectives. Okay. So the paper highlights the prevalent tech harms witnessed during elections in Africa. It focuses on elections that took place between 2021 to 2023. And then it also assesses how tech harms manifest from country to country during elections. But aside from just highlighting the 2021 to 2023 elections, we've also touched on some elections that happened from as far back as 2019, just to add some additional context. Other than that, the paper also proposes recommendations that platforms can take to protect electoral integrity and social media users. In terms of how we crafted this paper, we drew on targeted surveys. So we had developed a survey that we sent out to some of our partners. We also held one-on-one expert interviews, or interviews rather with experts that informed some of the findings of this research, as well as conducting desk research. So the findings, we hope that will serve as a basis for engaging policymakers and big tech companies as part of a broader campaign on tech accountability. Then before I get into the findings, so some of the initial conversations that we had and really revelations from that survey indicate that, of course, the most popular platforms that are in use are Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, YouTube, and TikTok. So these are widely used within the African region. However, the survey signaled out Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp as being the most prone to disinformation or misinformation campaigns and other tech harms during elections in the region. Then a lot of threats were identified, but mainly some of the online threats that were identified by the respondents were, for example, incitement, hate speech, dis and misinformation, tech-facilitated political violence, meddling by foreign actors and international influences, online gender-based violence, and harms against minorities. In addition, we had undermining confidence in electoral processes and integrity, and targeting of electoral officials, political figures, and prominent voices. So for the sake of this paper, we thought to dwell on the top 5 online threats that were reported from the research findings. And these were mis and disinformation, undermining confidence in democratic processes and targeting of electoral officials or prominent voices, election violence and hate speech, meddling by foreign actors and international influences, as well as gender-based violence and harms against minorities. I'll now go through each of these online harms just to give more context in terms of how they have been manifesting in the different countries that we were assessing that had elections in the time frame that I spoke to earlier. So in terms of misinformation, overall, there's been a surge of disinformation and misinformation during elections on the African continent. And we noticed this a lot within Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. As you know, these are countries that had elections at least between 2021 and 2023. Then to speak to the Kenyan landscape, you'll find that disinformation and misinformation are not new, first of all, to the Kenyan landscape. They've been recording misinformation and disinformation from as far back as 2017. But what was interesting within this current 2022 election was that disinformation merchants were hired by political parties to shape public opinions. I believe this was one of the very first times that we saw this happening on the African continent. Then there was also a proliferation in terms of the use of coded language to spread disinformation and violent ethnic narratives across platforms. And these, because it's coded language, are largely undetected by the platforms. Then when you come to Uganda, the government had banned access to Facebook ahead of the 2021 elections after Meta had closed down some pro-government accounts that were spreading political disinformation. And this ban is still in effect to date. Ugandans can't access Facebook unless, of course, using a VPN. Then in Nigeria, we see that social media, again here, social media influencers were secretly hired and paid by political parties to peddle misinformation online. So we see that this phenomenon around disinformation merchants is growing and spreading across the continent. Then when we move along to Zimbabwe, we find that so for Zimbabwe, for example, while they experience a fair amount of disinformation, WhatsApp was the channel of choice for a lot of the disinformation campaigns, because looking at the Zimbabwean context, which is sometimes quite hostile, people found WhatsApp, it being a closed platform, and it providing a broader reach. Zimbabweans considered it as a safe means of communication. So I find that a lot of the disinformation was channeled on WhatsApp. But overall, if you look at the objectives of the mis and especially the disinformation that were shared within all these countries, including DRC, you find that a lot of it was targeting political candidates, so either to discredit other political candidates or influential voices like EMBs or the electoral commissions, but most of all to deceive voters. And you find that a lot of the information that was being spread made it very difficult for people to distinguish authentic news from falsehoods. The second harm that we highlight in the white paper is undermining confidence in democratic processes and targeting of electoral officials or prominent voices. So we saw a lot of this in Nigeria and in Zimbabwe. So for example, in Nigeria, in the aftermath of the 2023 Nigerian elections, opposition political parties petitioned the election results. And you find that social media carried an explosion of fake news around this case. And most of it was targeting the Electoral Commission and some of the Supreme Court judges that were presiding over this matter. Then in Zimbabwe, similarly, we saw disinformation campaigns attempting to discredit the Electoral Commission, using false reports that the polling agents and election observers were being recalled to sign new V11 forms. So these would be, key forms that are used to enter final election results at each polling station. So a lot of the disinformation was around altering or a ploy to alter these forms. And an interesting finding within the Zimbabwean landscape is that we saw, I believe, almost for the first time where there was a direct targeting, the disinformation was now directly targeting election observer missions. So you find that observer missions from the EU, the Carter Center, and SADC Secretariat were equally victims of this disinformation and smear campaigns. Then moving along to election violence and hate speech. So a lot of the findings that we mapped were focused on Nigeria and DRC. So you find that, for example, in Nigeria, within the local Lagos elections, anti-Igbo rhetoric laced with ethnic undertones and stereotypes were targeted at non-Yoruba speaking communities, where they were calling them visitors and land grabbers. And interestingly enough, even top government officials made such allegations online. There's been one government official who penned a very long blog post calling for people to expel non-Yoruba speaking people from Lagos. Then in DRC, we see that prominent well-known individuals contributed again to the spreading of disinformation or messages that contained ethnic hatred and violence, mostly on social media platforms. And one of our coalition members recently published a report that recorded about 1,200 messages that contained hate speech, violence, and disinformation. And these reports were compiled over October to January. So in just under 4 or 5 months, they got such a huge number of reports. But consequently, about 19 deaths were recorded as a result of electoral violence, of which online hate speech was identified as a key contributor. So quite alarming quite an alarming situation that we are seeing from the last DRC election. But then also that just solidifies, there have been narratives and studies have shown that countries that are in active conflict or that experience active conflict are more prone to greater levels of disinformation that may lead to real life violence. So we really do see that connection in this instance. Then moving along to meddling by foreign actors and international influences. So we didn't see much of this on the continent in the last elections, except, of course, in the Kenyan context, where there were investigations that found that in the run-up to the 2022 Kenyan elections, an Israeli disinformation specialist hacked into emails and social media accounts of political advisors that were close to the current president of Kenya. But while the hacking did not have a direct influence on the poll, or in President Ruto's victory, we do see that this highlights the growing action of the involvement of bad or foreign actors and paid operatives that pose risks to the sovereignty of elections and democratic systems and institutions overall. Similarly, again, within the Kenyan context, another study found that a British data analytics firm is suspected to have used the large-scale data gathered from Kenya's publicly available voter registration databases, together with some data from Facebook, to conduct online political micro-targeting on digital platforms to sway voters' decisions. Lastly, one of the harms that I'll speak to is on gender-based violence and harms against minorities. So we saw this quite prevalent within Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. So we find that overall, when you look at all these 4 countries, the narratives were often negative comments online on women candidates' pages, often pointing to their inability to hold positions, reminding them of their place outside of politics, and really just reinforcing many existing stereotypical narratives. But we also saw some organized trolling, which has been on the rise, especially against women with public-facing careers, such as journalists, media personalities, and activists. So aside from the women politicians, we're seeing journalists, media personalities, as well as activists also increasingly being targeted. And we find that in Kenya, after the 2022 elections, a female political candidate actually vowed to never vie for political office due to the violence that she had faced online. So overall, you find that gender disinformation is being used across Africa as a tool to silence critics and exclude women from online civic discourses, especially female politicians and activists. And we're seeing that this is now creating some ripple effects on other women and girls who are now beginning to self-censor. So if it's happening to politicians, it's happening to a lot of the influential voices within their landscape and their ecosystem. We are finding that other women, girls, and other minorities are beginning to self-censor. So that's about some of the highlights of the white paper. I believe my colleague Mona will share it in the chat section so you can have a read and just digest some of those findings. But before I conclude, so we made a few recommendations to what tech platforms can do. I'll just quickly go over them. Again, I invite you to interact with the report. The recommendations, they are quite detailed, but I'll just try and summarize for this afternoon. So the main recommendations are, firstly, calling for tech platforms to provide fully and equitably resourced elections plans that are proportionate to the risk of harm presented by each country and not market size. Other than that, we are also calling for tech platforms to ensure trustworthiness and information plurality during the elections. So, for example, by establishing working relationships with local structures in country, for example, your election management bodies, civil society organizations, fact checkers, and so on and so forth, who we know can weigh in and provide critical information on the political, social, and economic context of the country. The third recommendation is on countering the reach and effects of disinformation, misinformation, and online gender-based violence, and targeting of minority groups. So really by engaging, what we're proposing is that by engaging in effective and timely content moderation, determining the number of human content moderators to support the automated content moderation process, as well as language coverage of the content moderators, so expanding on that to ensure that there's cultural competency. We're also recommending that platforms should also enhance cross-platform collaboration to prevent the sharing of electoral disinformation that jumps from one platform and goes on to the next. The other recommendation is on establishing proper oversight and transparency across the board. So really platforms should ensure publicly publishing their terms of service and different policies, But other than that, being able to provide regular updates if there are any changes to specifically election-related policies, recommender operations, content moderation systems, and so on and so forth. But we're also calling for transparency in political advertising, especially around labeling of content of such adverts on the platforms, as well as publishing financial information of the political advertising that is happening within these platforms, to enable scrutiny of campaign finance and spending. The other recommendation is on making data available for researchers. As you know, this is key to understanding the effects of social media and online harms on people and elections. So really making data available, platform data rather, available to researchers to allow for independent scrutiny. Last but not the least, it's on combating deceptive use of AI. So that would be deepfake and generative AI content. So while we may not have seen a lot of this in use, especially in the past elections, however, experts do warn that the creation, use, and distribution of such content will intensify as more people acquire the skills to do so. So we're really calling for the platforms to also focus on putting up measures to combat deceptive use of such technologies. So in a nutshell, that's about the white paper on tech harms during elections in Africa. I believe Mona has shared the link. So please feel free to read through, interact with it, and hope that you find it insightful. Other than that, we'll be continuing with our discussion this afternoon. So that was more of setting the context, so we see where we are coming from, even as we get into discussing where we are currently with the elections that are scheduled to take place this year. So if you have any questions, we'll have a long plenary after all the speakers have spoken. So please hold on to those thoughts, but at the same time, just put them in the chat section and we'll address them as we go. Next up, allow me to invite Kimau Harvey from the Legal Resources Center. As you know, Africa goes to the polls tomorrow. A lot is at stake currently, and we really just want to learn from him and from the work of the Legal Resources Center. What are some of the trends that we are seeing when it comes to online harms in South Africa, and what are some of the concerns that we should be paying attention to? So Kimau, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. It's a great honor to be here on this panel discussion and to be the one to bring the South African context into this really important conversation. I'm going to just speak firstly briefly about the work that the LRC are doing in this field. So beginning of last year, we launched our Democratized Big Tech program. And the purpose and the goals for that program were to ensure democracy, and in particular elections, are not influenced by unregulated big tech mechanisms such as like surveillance, AI, and social media ad tech. We also wanted to engage, advocate, and possibly launch litigation if necessary for accountability mechanisms within the country, mostly just to ensure that big tech companies equitably implement existing protections against disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech, specifically in the Global South and South Africa, and very much in line with the Global Coalition on Tech Justice's asks that Belinda very nicely and succinctly summarized earlier on. We also want to advocate for the promulgation of updated and or new laws that encompass the gaps in regulation in the South African context in relation to big tech, such as social media campaigning for political parties or other political actors, AI technology, digital surveillance, etc., etc. In relation to social media itself, the LRC, in connection with our partners in Global Witness, we ran 3 we've run 3 social media investigations, and effectively the purpose of these investigations was to see how well are we protected from disinformation, misinformation, and specifically also hate speech type content on our online spaces. I think this is particularly important is because it's like social media is a very sort of unprecedented space in terms of regulation. And we see that people use it more and more now, specifically centered around elections. And we wanted to make sure that these spaces were safeguarded, as the name of this panel discussion suggests, from this kind of harmful content. So we ran 2 investigations with the support and guidance of Global Witness. Those 2 investigations centered around hate speech content. We developed adverts in isiZulu, isiXhosa, Afrikaans, and English. And then we created posts that were then converted into adverts on these social media platforms, ad tech mechanism. And then we sent it for what's known as sort of like review on these processes. The important part of the methodology that Global Witness shared with us is that through this process, you don't actually ever post anything publicly. It's only seen between yourself and the moderators. In the first investigation, we wanted to test hate speech that was directed towards migrants. There was content that was suggesting migrants were similar to cockroaches or describing them as diseases. And there were many other different very horrific sort of hate speech examples that we used. On Meta's platforms, 36 out of 38 of those adverts were accepted to go publicly. On TikTok, 38 of them were accepted for public consumption, and YouTube, it was the same, all 38 were accepted. We, of course, then deleted the adverts as soon as we received the results, and then we put together a report and shared it with the companies. Our second investigation did a similar hate speech test, except this time we were generating content that was directed towards journalists who identify as women. There were some posts that said they are sheep and should be slaughtered, or they all need to die. On Meta, on TikTok, all 40 of them were outright accepted for publication. On YouTube and Twitter, all 40 also were accepted for publication. Some of them were flagged as sort of not being appropriate for all audiences, but still for some audiences. So those are the 2 hate speech investigations that we ran. Then just last week, the LRC, using the same methodology, but this time on our own, ran a election disinformation investigation. So this one, we wanted to test disinformation specifically related to election information. This could be information that obviously would be untrue specifically to do with the methodology. We wanted to make sure that Facebook and, well, I mean, not Facebook, we did this specifically on TikTok and YouTube, but we wanted to make sure that their platforms were ready to deal with disinformation 1 week before the election, might I add, which is tomorrow. We came up with 16 adverts. Some of them said, you must be 21 to vote. It's not true. You need to be 18 to vote in this country. And then there was another post that said, in the previous election, there was widespread voter fraud. It's not true. That's not what happened at all. But you get the gist of it is we wanted to create disinformation and see whether or not they could deal with it. On TikTok and on YouTube, 15 out of the 16 adverts were accepted for publication. And then again, as the methodology goes, we deleted the adverts before they could ever be seen by the public. On TikTok, the one that was flagged was a post that suggested that you needed to be vaccinated in order to vote. But they didn't give us a reason for why that was flagged. But I can imagine with the COVID-19 crisis just behind us, that their platform was ready to deal with content related to that. On YouTube's platform, they flagged an advert that said that one of the parties was disqualified by our IEC, our election regulators. And the reason that was given is this kind of advert is not allowed in South Africa. And of course, the irony is that all 16 of the adverts should not be allowed in South Africa. Now, these are just obviously the 3 investigations are examples of content that we've made up, but they come from real world situations and harms that we have identified being relevant to the South African context. And it's really important that the social media companies are aware that when the reason that we did these investigations is because we can see this kind of content every day that we go online. So just this year, I've picked up a few examples of real world harm that's already being done on social media related to hate speech and disinformation. So there were accounts on X/Twitter that have been previously picked up by Bloomberg, Tech Central, and a research center called the Center for Information Resilience that were used previously to promote Russia's interest in South Africa quite a few years ago, specifically centered around the invasion of Ukraine. These same accounts were now shown in the 2024 election cycle to be rallying support for the Umkhonto we Sizwe party, the MKP. That's a new party that was formed last year. And it was being done in a positive and a negative sense. These X accounts were being shown to criticize Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC, but they were also seen to bolster up support for the MK party and Zuma himself. One of the accounts and some of the other accounts were even retweeting a deep fake video of Donald Trump himself endorsing Jacob Zuma. Obviously, it's a deep fake, so it wasn't a real video, but it spread quite far, and quite a few people had to deal with seeing this disinformation right in front of them. Another example is there was a TikTok video where an Umkhonto Sizwe party member was sort of superimposed himself in front of a video that showed thousands of supporters dressed in green and marching on the streets. And he said, look how much support there is for the MK party. Thanks to one of the independent organizations, Africa Check, they then revealed that the video was actually a rally from the Dominican Republic in May of 2023 and had absolutely nothing to do with Zuma or the MK party. I'm going to just talk about two more examples. There was a video going around TikTok and Twitter this month was informing voters that the IEC would not allow voters to vote if they had nail polish or acrylics or fake nails on their fingers, because apparently, according to these posts, the indelible ink that you need to put on your finger, or you get put on your finger after you voted, wouldn't work if you had these kind of decorations on your fingernails. The IEC then had to come up very strongly and say, no, that is not true at all. It doesn't matter what you do with your fingernails, you can vote as long as you're over the age of 18 and have a South African ID document. But as you can imagine, this kind of stuff does the harm already before the IEC can do anything. So in conclusion, the IEC, as well as many independent organizations like Media Monitoring Africa, Africa Check, like I mentioned before, Real 411, and the LRC and our partners here in the Global Coalition of Tech Justice are working tirelessly to push back against the widespread attempts at inciting hate speech and spreading dis and misinformation. However, unfortunately, and the election is tomorrow, we are playing a reactive game. So at this point, we're effectively shouting at a wall, asking these social media companies to have an effect on the South African context, at least. Obviously, we want them, even though our election is tomorrow and it's probably too late to implement anything now, we still want these fully resourced and equitable action plans to be implemented so that the rest of the Global South specifically can be beneficiaries of that system. Tomorrow's election is not going to be the last election as well, and so improvement later on is always going to benefit us in the future. So yeah, it's my personal opinion, it might be a little bit too late for South Africa now. Our investigations reveal that effectively the damage has been done and the damage can be done. And tomorrow and whatever happens after tomorrow, hopefully nothing, touch wood, but the social media companies will have to face the music if it does happen, if something does happen. So now on the ground, it's the responsibility of civil society organizations, the IEC and the government to ensure that the negative impact that social media could have on our elections tomorrow is not as widespread and it can be mitigated as best as possible. We know that hate speech and disinformation can be posted on these platforms, and that's why it's really important that we as an organization and as a coalition of organizations, as well as the other independent organizations, equip ourselves to deal with it, because the social media companies have not. We're pushing against the cyberspace void that is endless and unfortunately unregulated, or not properly regulated. So we have to make our voices much louder now and irritating, and we have to be repetitive on this issue so that people can take notice and remember. Social media is a double-edged sword. So I spend majority of my time talking about the negative side of that sword, but there is very fortunately a positive edge of the sword. And it's an edge that we all enjoy, and it's the reason that we're asking the space to be regulated. Because social media is a communal space, it's a socialist democratic dream in many respects, and therefore we can use it as civil society to push back. We can dissuade people from inciting content like this. We can debunk factually incorrect information or harmful information. And hopefully in the future, while we continue to do this, we can push back against these behemoth billionaire tech boys who forgot why they created these social media spaces in the first place. So we will continue to do the work here in South Africa as in the LRC and as a part of the global coalition. And we just hope that in the future, South African elections will be very safeguarded from online tech harms. Thank you, and wish us luck tomorrow.
We definitely do. Thanks a lot, Mal, for unpacking what is happening currently in South Africa. I mean, really alarming to see what's coming out of LRC's investigations, where you adapted real world situations, and yet those ads were approved. So really, really alarming. But we're also seeing now the increased use of deepfake content within the electoral context. But also kudos to all the stakeholders that have been collaborating and working together. Hopefully it's something that we can all begin to replicate just as a first step to securing accountability. Quickly, we'll now move along. So the Mozambican election is scheduled to hold in October of this year. And on the call, we have, I hope I don't butcher your name, the English speaker in me. But yeah, on the call, we have Armando Francelino, who works with MISA Mozambique, who's going to shed light on some of the context within Mozambique. As you know, a lot of the platform elections plans and investments have been on bigger countries with bigger markets. But now we really just want to hear from someone that's coming from Mozambique, that is sometimes considered an at-risk country where tensions there are brewing, but we don't see the platforms trying to focus on such countries. So, Armando, over to you. Please take it away. Thanks.
Hi, Bulanda. Good afternoon. I hope you hear me all right. Oh,
yes, we can.
Thank you so much for having me. Before I proceed, maybe I should give you the context of what we have been doing at MISA Mozambique. MISA is the national chapter of Media Institute of Southern Africa. This is a regional NGO which is based in Zimbabwe. So MISA Mozambique is basically the chapter of MISA regional. All we do at MISA is to ensure that journalists can exercise their job, without interference. So we defend and we promote press freedom and also access to information. And here on access to information is where we have been implementing some initiatives, mainly on mis and disinformation. Because for us as MISA Mozambique, access to information is not only about getting information, but it is also about getting the right information, because as citizens we need to have accurate information so that we can participate in democratic process, including elections in our countries. So that's why we have been implementing some activities, some initiatives in terms of fighting mis and disinformation as a way to ensure that citizens, including journalists who are our main target, but our idea is to ensure that citizens in general can get accurate information they need to participate in those processes. So in this context, after realizing that a lot of mis and disinformation are, being disseminated in Mozambique, particularly in online space. We have decided in 2020 to create, a fact-checking unit, which is called the MISA Mozambique. This was created during COVID time, and you all remember that during that moment, we also had a lot of misleading narratives going around. So we decided to create, a fact-checking unit, which in our point of view played an important role in countering disinformation on that period. But after COVID, we also realized that our electoral process were being, characterized by a lot of mis and disinformation. And here is where we decided to change our focus to, counter disinformation related to elections. So we have been doing some work on that. Last year, Bulanda was talking about general elections we are having in October this year. But last year, we had local elections here in Mozambique. It was also in October. And what we noted from that elections is that, the political actors, mainly political parties, but also their candidates, were also using misinformation, were also using disinformation, as a strategy to do their campaign, to harm their opponents and so on. And this was critical. Here in Mozambique, a lot of misleading narrative were spread using digital platforms with a clear intention to harm, opponents, to harm, other political parties, to harm other political candidates for that election last year. And something we noted is that in our context are not the political parties, are not the candidates themselves, spreading disinformation. You find some people, some of them even, unsuspected people. But you will understand that they are always spreading misleading narrative. Although you have no identification of the people behind that information, from the content they are spreading, you can easily understand that this is coming from that direction, the direction of certain party, and their target is the other party that they are fighting against. From the work we did last year, a lot of that narratives were coming from, or at least were benefiting the ruling party in Mozambique, which is Frelimo, which tells us how the ruling party is really investing in such misleading narratives as a way to do their political activities. And this for us is critical because we are now having another elections in Mozambique in October. We are going to general elections, and unfortunately, we didn't see any effort. Now I'm talking a little bit about the role of the big tech in terms of countering disinformation. We didn't see anything being done from them, in order to counter disinformation. So this is for us a critical issue because when you have a political actors using misinformation, using disinformation, they are not only threatening their opponents. At the end of the day, they are threatening. At the end of the day, they are undermining the democracy itself. We can't build our countries while the fundamental process, the democratic process, including elections, are based in lies, because this is what is happening. They are spreading lies, they are spreading misleading narratives, they are spreading disinformation so that they can take advantage from that. But what we are saying is that no, we need to fight as MISA, but also as and Kima was talking about the role that can be played by civil society organization. Our understanding is that all of us, we need to join efforts to fight this war, because we are facing a war, in fact, when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to disinformation. In terms of hate speech, we do not have yet at MISA Mozambique, experience in terms of initiatives done on that specific areas. But from a personal perspective, I can tell you that this is also a big problem we are facing in Mozambique. This was a topic of my master dissertation, and one of the key findings of that study, in fact, was that political propagandistic, mainly, again, most of them from Frelimo Party, the ruling party in Mozambique, are using more and more online speeches, to target all the people, all the voices that are criticizing the ruling party. So here, they are not only targeting, other political actors or their opponents, they are targeting all the voices that, criticizing the ruling party, including journalists, including civil society organizations, including human rights defenders. So whenever you have a different point of view from the one of the ruling party, you become a target for that waves of hate speeches here in Mozambique. And this is critical, because we have been seeing that more and more people are suffering that online violence coming from the ruling party. And we have even here cases of people who were killed, were assassinated after being insulted from people, coming from the ruling party, using those platforms. We have civil society activists, we have scholars here who have been, assassinated And the problem started, using hate speeches until they were, assassinated or raped here. So as my first remarks, I could share that point from our experience here. We have Facebook and WhatsApp as the most used, online platforms. And as I said before, they have completely failed in terms of addressing such online threats, at least in our context. They have been doing nothing related to that. And that's why I was also saying that these remain very critical for us, since we are now going to another elections in Mozambique. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Armando, for pointing out those highlights. We definitely also wish you all the best in the coming election. And it's really interesting to see that, and which really matches, in all the different scenarios where we are seeing that while, political candidates may not directly engage in the disinformation campaign, behind them are, highly organized, highly sophisticated groups and trolls that are managing this. So in moving along, before we move along, perhaps I'll just quickly go over some of the items within the chat section. Guy there has posted an article that just reinforces the ask on access to data. And Raymond here also, Uganda is going to an election sometime 2025, 2026. However, I believe that a lot still remains, it's still a challenge rather, to have the voice of Africa when it comes to demanding for accountability from big tech who provide both platform and content moderation. Which is why I believe the Global Coalition for Tech Justice was born, because really there's strength in numbers, there's strength in collaboration and in working together. RIMA has posted the Digital Freedom Fund that supports strategic litigation on digital rights in Europe. So if anyone has any ideas or knows of any other organizations or similar grants that are focused on the African region, please do share. A lot of us are interested in engaging in strategic litigation, especially taking the platform to task. I've noted the other questions and we'll come back to them. But the last comment says that I have seen the effect of using open source intelligence in tackling misinformation in the Israel-Hamas war, and with great results. So I believe we can encourage the use of this open source intelligence to tackle certain AI-generated and traditionally crafted online misinformation in the election season. Thanks a lot, Raymond, for sharing that. At least we are seeing some solutions that are coming up. And last but not the least, Ghana goes to the polls this December. Richard, would you please just give us some context on what is happening currently and what you're projecting in the lead up to that election? Thank you. Richard, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you also hear me?
Yes, please give us a quick introduction and then get into the presentation. Thank you.
Very well. Okay, so I want you to see can you see my face?
Not anymore. I think you've turned off your camera, but we were seeing you. Yes, now we can. Please proceed.
Okay, so Bulanda, let me say very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to colleagues. My name is Richard Kasu, the Executive Director of Community Focus Foundation Ghana. But permit me to off my video so that I can have a good internet connectivity to carry the. So to follow the laid down protocol, I think I also give a brief introduction about ourselves, what we've been doing in the context of electoral integrity, what we have done so far in fact-checking, disinformation, hate speech, fake news, among others, and what we want to do specifically to handle or to contribute our quota so far as the Ghanaian election is concerned. So, this is CFF's Electoral Integrity Initiative for Democratic Consolidation. That's our program. And under it, we have the national campaign that is being led by CFF together with its partners. The National Information Integrity Campaign, which is aimed to promoting free and fair elections in Ghana. So CFF is a coordinating civil society organization for the Safeguarding Our Democracy Initiative. The initiative is a democracy advocacy group which consists of leading civil society groups working in the areas of governance, electoral integrity, human rights, peace, and security. We are also members of the Global Tech. We are a member of the Global Tech Coalition. So since its inception, we have contributed immensely to democratic consolidation processes in Ghana, Africa, and the world, particularly on elections credibility. During the Kenyan election, CFF was part of a consortium of civil society groups that also did a lot of advocacy around peace building, positive youth engagement, among others. We work closely with the Amani community in Kenya, the FWM, and also Justice Action Point, a Ugandan-based NGO. And our advocacy has produced a lot of impact. So as part of the upcoming Ghanaian election, we've been disinformation, misinformation, fake news, and hello?
Sorry, Richard, I think your line is breaking a bit. Perhaps if you could...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Great.
Hopefully your
Thank you.
connection will be stable.
Pardon me, the network is fluctuating, so but I'll manage. Okay, so as I mentioned, Ghana is going to the elections. We are widely been reported as Ghana is a country or the citadel of democracy in West Africa, and for that matter, Africa. But there are a lot of factors that are eroding those glorious accolades. While the frequency of election in Ghana and advancement in the quality of democracy has generated a sense of optimism for multi-party politics, this development has, however, been closely accompanied by another much more worrying trend of information disorders, ably aided by social media, coupled with evolving artificial intelligence. This challenge undoubtedly is a big threat to election integrity. Because in our context, as we talk now, there are a lot of deep fake videos. The political atmosphere has become very tense with disinformation campaigns. And this has been facilitated against candidates and micro-targeting of voters. For instance, in the last presidential election of the last parliamentary primaries of the governing New Patriotic Party, the NPP, they are the government in power. One of their candidates, a lady, there was a video which has gone viral, suggesting that the woman was involved in some kind of fraud and on the verge of deportation. And the video looked as if it had been reported by CNN. The deportation had been reported by CNN. And this has caused a lot of disaffection for the woman, because this is a woman who is in the midst of the election, and a group of people or people who are not supporting her created that video, possibly using AI, to disinform the people, to incite the people against her that she's not a credible candidate. And this has happened at a time that we have been advocating for affirmative action, equal representation. Can you imagine? So as we are going to this general election, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of issues happening. People who sit in the comfort of their homes, create videos. Some, they issue press statements, writing other people's names under them, using fake numbers. When the media want to cross-check, you call, the number will not go through. You send an email, it will bounce back. And before you go back to the people, how do you go back to these people, the millions of Ghanaians or the millions of people in the diaspora, to say that, look, the presidential candidate of Party A, what we said about him, it is a lie. They don't go back. And this creates or dents candidates forever. So, like I said, the political environment is already very tense. It's already tense. Fake news is everywhere. People are threatening political opponents through social media. Some recruit activists who are giving some peanuts, and they are on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, 24/7, issuing statements that are not true to defame people they consider as their political opponent. So, like I said, this is very troubling, because this manipulation through the recruitment of youth in recent time by political leaders to create and use Facebook, fake social media accounts. So they create fake social media accounts. So how do you even deal with these people? Because in the first place, the people, they are not real people. But a lot of people doesn't know that they are not real. How does the person in my village who does not have access to internet, or who is not even using a gadget that can give access, get to know that what they are saying in the radio about something? Because when the news breaks, the people, the radio station, because they also need content, Some irresponsible ones doesn't even verify the content. They just want to break the news. And actually, when the news is broken in the local language, a lot of people get to understand what is happening. But when whether it is true or not, they cannot in any way ascertain it. So it's like the elites have taken charge. They have been manipulating the youth, resulting in discouragement of youth from opting to explore democratic, political, and civil processes. So in Ghana now, the youth, because most of them doing those things on Facebook is the cheapest way for them to get some money. So to engage in any civil campaign in their quest of marketing their preferred political parties or candidates, they do not do it. They rather prefer using propaganda narrative on social media to run down the campaign. So if you come to Ghana, some will tell you, they'll boldly tell you that it is Machiavellian tactics, or they are using communist inferior tactics to run down. So in Ghana, political propaganda is entrenched. So you can be a very good, Bulanda, you can be a very good candidate, loved by the people, but within a twinkle of an eye, these so recruited elements, for me, I call them social media bandits, will just run you down, create disaffection for you, push you out of the race. And that is what is happening now. So recognizing the risk information disorders pose to election credibility and the roles civil society organizations need to play in safeguarding democracies around the world. Community Focused Foundation Ghana, through its Safeguarding Our Democracy initiative. This initiative is a strategic initiative designed to promote democratic consolidation processes in Ghana and beyond. We aim to undertake key activities
Hi, Richard. I think we lost you there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So if you could begin to wind up, so we can get into
Okay.
a brief Q&A. Thanks. We still can't hear you.
Just a minute. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please give us your concluding remarks.
Okay, so we're trying to quickly, we're trying to conduct some few key activities, including organizing a National Information Integrity Forum for electoral stakeholders to share their perspective on disinformation and information, disinformation and misinformation. See how collectively we can prevent, reduce this phenomenon in our electoral processes. And also we want to embark on a media campaign, media awareness campaign through press engagement, social media engagement on disinformation disorder ahead of the national election. We also plan to train stakeholders, including selected journalists, youth leaders, civil society leaders on misinformation, disinformation, and the propaganda by politicians who amplify their toxic narrative through the media. So that with all this, we believe that when we do this, at least the people will become more aware. There will be the youth who are being recruited, who may, some of them may run away from those kind of dangerous enterprises, and they will be willing to contribute positively towards our democratic consolidation process. So, Belinda, thank you so much for the opportunity. I am on the line. If there are any questions, if there are organizations who are interested in partnering with us for us to carry out all these interventions collectively, our doors are open. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing that Ghanaian context. Really interesting to see that disinformation merchants had worked there. Deepfake content is circulating. It only shows that this trend will continue to grow. But also, sad to see all those false videos that are being shared to discredit candidates. And in this case, it was a woman candidate. Again, while the political situation may be tense, we hope that that situation improves, and of course, wishing you all the best. Thanks a lot for sharing some of those strategic initiatives that CFF Ghana is working on. That said, we'll now move into our Q&A. I know we have quite a number of questions already. I have two that are for Kimau to address, but it's really questions, or if you have any reflections. Rachel, I know Tanzania will be going to an election this year. Do you have any reflections on today's conversation? Tunisia also likely to have an election, although no election date yet. But also we have colleagues from Burundi, Uganda. You guys are likely to have elections 2025 to 2026. So I open up for reflection from your end as well as questions. Thank you. Do we have any hands raised? Yes, Prime, go ahead. Prime, you may go ahead to ask your question or make your contribution. Okay, as we wait for Prime, Kimau, we have a question or questions here for you. So Craig says that I'm curious about platform response to these experiments and also what time period they ran over. At the same time, how much reach or trust does the IEC have, and what is their relationship with the platforms? So if you could speak to those two questions as we wait for more questions to come up. Thanks.
Thanks, Belinda. Yeah, I did see those questions. So let me deal with the first question about the platform responses and the experiment time period. So just to quickly deal with the experiment time period thing first, I just want to, I'm not sure in what context that question is coming from, but let me just answer it in two ways. One, the experiment adverts didn't run publicly at all. So I want to very adamantly sort of re-emphasize that. The methodology that we used in connection with Global Witness was we submitted the adverts for future publication to the ad tech platforms on these social media companies. And the reason that we did that in that way is to test their ad tech content moderation mechanisms without ever participating in the spread of hate speech and disinformation. So in that way, we came up with the content that was harmful, and we said, would you allow us to post this? They said, in most instances, in majority of the instances, they said yes. And then we said, okay, well, we don't actually want content like that online, so we're going to delete it before it ever gets posted. And the way we did that is we set it like 2 or 3 weeks in advance for a future publication if it was accepted for through the review. And then as soon as we got the results, which came within 24 hours, we then deleted the adverts. So to answer the question in terms of time period, there was no time period of which the ads were being published. If the question was meant more in the sense of how long we did the investigations for, we would set up the social media accounts. They were fake accounts, and we would hold them for about a week, just to make them look like they were real accounts. And then within a 2 or 3 day process, we would post the adverts, get the results, delete the adverts, and then delete their accounts. Well, not delete their accounts, but sort of turn them off. So now onto the issue of the platform responses. We got a response from both TikTok and Meta straight away after we did the first investigation. Meta's response was a copy-paste response. We're ready to deal with disinformation and hate speech. Our platforms are well-resourced and deal with these kind of things. It didn't really reveal much about what their actual policy was or why they would deviate based on different contexts. We never heard back from Meta after that response. TikTok said the same thing, but with a longer explanation, saying that they have large amounts of content moderators in the African context. Many of them speak a wide variety of languages, including isiZulu, isiXhosa, English, and Afrikaans. The results from our second investigation, which was also multilingual, kind of suggests that maybe that isn't the case. But that was their response. TikTok did invite us to have a sort of roundtable discussion where we could maybe talk about how to engage collaboratively, but that conversation never came about. They effectively ghosted us. We have never heard anything from X/Twitter, even though we did give them our results. Google also offered to have a conversation, but then also effectively ghosted us. With respect to Meta, though, we are currently using South Africa's Promotion of Access to Information Act to try and find out more information about their policies. But we're still in the process of doing that because they are playing hardball with us. And then, yeah, the second question was about the trust and the relationship that the social media companies might have with the IEC. First, I want to emphasize that the IEC is one arm of governance in South Africa that has always had the trust of the people. It's never had any major incidences in terms of free and fair elections in South Africa, and we're quite fortunate that that has been the case. Many agents and party officials have tried to dissuade the public about the integrity of the IEC, but a lot of people have pushed back on that, and that has been really important. That being said, they have announced again for these elections that they are in a working relationship with the social media companies in order to, as they say, curb disinformation. Although we can't put the responsibility all on the IEC, they're responsible for running the entire election, and they need the support of the social media companies. So if they have an agreement, then the responsibility is now on the social media companies to honor that agreement. Our investigations and research and lack of response in these companies suggest that maybe they won't uphold that agreement, but let's hope that tomorrow when the election goes live that they do. And they've also roped in independent organizations like Media Monitoring Africa and their platform of Real 411. But again, as I noted in my presentation, these independent organizations are only ever going to be able to be reactive. And that's why it's so important that the social media companies have safeguards and checks that are already implemented on their systems to deal with elections now and in the future, so that we don't have to do these sort of reactive responses all the time. But in terms of just sort of bringing it back, there is a large amount of trust in the IEC, and we should make sure that it stays. I see that there are questions coming back in the chat, but I'll kind of circle back to those, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thanks a lot, Kemal, for that. I see here we have a question from Prime that says that most of the hate speech, online gender-based violence, and other harms are done online. What concrete actions or advocacy can we engage in to hold big tech accountable, especially during elections? Amanda, would you like to comment on, Amanda or Richard, would you like to comment on that?
Hey, Bulanda, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please,
Okay.
yeah, how can we hold big tech accountable?
Yeah, well, I think that it's important to bring them on board. I mean, how can we engage those companies on that issues? I think this is important. Of course, we have to continue, doing our job, including how we raise awareness, public awareness on that issue. But at the same time, I think that we need to find strategies. We need to find ways where we can engage those companies. We sit with them and then we show how serious the problem is, because this is not only a problem to be solved by a single, agent. I think the problem is serious in such way that it requires all of us to discuss. So I have no expertise in terms of how you do that kind of engagement with those social media company, but from the work we have been doing with telecommunications companies, for example, one of our strategy we've been using in the last couple of years is to find ways to find strategy so that we can sit with them and then we can all have a conversation on those issues, because as we said, this is very serious.
Thank you so much, Armando. I don't know, Richard, if you also would like to weigh in, but yeah, thanks a lot, Armando, for emphasizing that we need to be engaging with the platforms. I believe No One Up Now has mastered platform engagements, but yeah, it's definitely something that we need to keep pursuing. Richard, any reflections on that?
Yes, Bulanda, thank you. Like my brother said, it is critically important that we engage the digital platform. They are key stakeholders in this. If you really want to address the issues, we need to engage them and let them be part of the solution, because that will bring about ownership and sustainability. If they are not part of it, we can push, we can do that advocacy, but to what end? When the people themselves who are key stakeholders are not involved. So we need to have that kind of platform to have frank conversations around the issues, the threats, the discomfort, and all the issues around it, so that collectively we can address these threats of disinformation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Richard, for those reflections. So we're in the dying minutes of our call. Circling back to you, Kemal, I don't know if you have any comment on the question around, did platforms offer micro-targeting, or did you try this? Also, if there were any sort of changes, especially after the experiments that you did or the investigations, if there were any changes to the advertisement policies in the electoral process, or even a consideration of that, considering that in Brazil, for example, Google pulled political ads from their Google ad platform. Did we see any sort of like similar measures within South Africa? Thanks.
Thanks, Bulanda. So I'll start from the bottom up. So in terms of changements to advertisement policies, whether or not that's happened, I can't confirm, and LRC neither, because as I explained, we've kind of, and you kind of hinted at it as well, Bulanda, but we've been kind of excluded from the conversation in a way. It seems that there are other actors that are more engaged with the social media companies. We are not an example of that, unfortunately. So whether or not they have responded to the tests that we did, I don't have an answer for that, because we've only got these sort of stock responses from them. When we did reveal the investigation results, they said, oh, well, we've removed your accounts. And I said, well, okay, well, that's great, but we were allowed to do it before you could remove them. And then when we did the second and the third investigation, all we had to do was set up new accounts. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that counts as a change to advertisement policy. I don't think it does. In terms of micro-targeting, we didn't specifically try it because we wanted to keep the sample size of our investigation as wide as possible, but there are options to do that on the ad tech platforms, using their mechanisms for advertisements. You can do things sort of like location and age group and stuff like that. Although it was, at least on the Meta side, when I was doing those investigations, you couldn't necessarily sort of specifically micro-target on things like on race or gender. But there are ways, I suppose, if you know the sort of socio-demographic context of your country, the way of turning location micro-targeting and age micro-targeting in to fit those kind of more, let's say, malicious categories when it comes to micro-targeting. And I think that is what some advertisers have been able to do in the past. Although obviously these social media companies are constantly like reanalyzing and doing their platforms, and so these things change all the time. Whether or not they're responding to our investigations and other investigations done by our colleagues, we don't know.
Thanks a lot, Kamau. We've come to the end of our conversation this afternoon. I know there may still be some burning questions or other reflections, but we have to bring it to a close. It's really been an enlightening time, listening to all of the speakers, really just hearing the different trends, the contexts within all the different countries that were highlighted this afternoon. So it's really a big thank you from myself and the team at Digital Action, to our speakers. Thank you for enriching our conversation. And now we know a lot more about what is happening within the electoral landscape in South Africa, Ghana, Mozambique, and we'll be sure to watch out for some of these tech harms that are likely to happen. We'll definitely be documenting and weighing in on the conversation. So a big thank you to the speakers. Also, a big thank you to the participants. Thank you for being engaging. I hope that you equally found this conversation as enlightening as I did. That said, I would like to bring this call to a close, and I'll now stop the recording.